have the gift to all inspire, and have not love, my words are vain as sounding brass and hopeless gain. Oh, I may give all I possess, and striving so my love profess, but be not given by love within, the prophet soon turns strangely thin. Come, Spirit, come, our hearts control, our spirits long to be made whole. Let inward love guide every deed. By this we worship and are freed.
Very well done, very well done. You guys, that sounded so amazing. That was so nice, you two. Thank you so much for doing that for us. What a wonderful treat. Okay. Well, if that doesn't start your Sunday off just right, I don't know what will. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Now that our chalice is lit, we would like to invite you to share any joys or concerns that you might have.
I'd like to light a candle for the joy of the generosity of this fellowship. Our guest at our table raised over $420.
Wow.
So a check for $420 was written out to UU Service Community or
That's
Committee.
wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Ramona.
I'd like to light a candle for the pure joy of live music. That was so happy to me. Thank you.
If you didn't hear that, the joy of live music. Yeah, that was wonderful, you guys. Thank you so much. I agree, Katie.
May I light one?
Please.
I want to light a candle for the joy of getting to see my granddaughter in a few days.
How do you?
And could we light a candle? My mom just got her second vaccine. I think some of you are also vaccinated. It's very exciting to have that happen. So yay, vaccines.
Good morning, everyone. I hadn't seen my grandchildren for several months, and I have a 4-year-old grandson who's autistic, and so it had been like 3 months since I'd seen him, and when he came to the house last week, he said, "Can I have some cake and ice cream?" Just as plain as day, and he hadn't spoken, you know, I hadn't heard him say a complete sentence. So I'm so grateful for that, and I'm lighting a candle for Christian, my grandson.
Oh, that's so wonderful.
Oops.
I have a similar candle. My father-in-law, he celebrated his 70th birthday this week, And yesterday would have been his mom's 96th birthday. She passed away a few months ago, but and it's the same day that he got his wings. He passed his pilot's license test. And we had, for the first time since, I guess, last March, I guess it was March 3rd last year, we had our first family gathering last night at their house. It was really cool to get to see everybody again in person.
We've got a joy to share. We're very excited. Sonia's very excited. On Valentine's Day a week ago, Grace and I decided to get married to each other. Thank you.
Yay! Good
We're-
job.
No date
Yay,
set.
hurrah.
It's all like open to possibility, but it will happen eventually.
I will.
We're really excited.
Yes,
Congratulations.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
We're all excited for you. That's such great news.
That's another candle.
I mean,
And
yeah.
this is by far the most
Maybe
people that
three
we've told. Like the number of people who now know about this just went up like logarithmically. Yeah.
Congratulations to all three of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to Susie too.
Yeah, there's Susie over there.
Oh, how cool. Well, I don't want to cut anyone off. Are there any others? Or is that just the best note to end on? All right. I will light one more candle for joys and concerns felt but not expressed. All right. That was pretty wonderful. So last week, Emmett Kraft. Emmett, come on in. Emmett did a great job helping us with our reading. And so I've prevailed upon him once more to read a little story for us. And so if you have children in the house that would like to hear a story, it starts right there, buddy. Here, we can put this here for you. There you go. And as soon as you're ready, you can start reading.
Okay. One day,
You can take your mask off if you want while you're reading.
one day, Muhammad told his friends and followers a story about a thirsty man, a well, and a dog. This was the story. A man left his home to take a long journey. It was a hot day, and he had not walked far before his head began to ache and his mouth felt dry. The sun blazed overhead. The fields he passed were brown and withered, and no water could be seen. "I'm so thirsty. I must find water," he muttered. "Surely I will come to a well." Just as he had thought, he saw a well by the side of the road. Thankfully, he hurried to it. It almost tasting the sweetness of the cool water that lay in its depths. But when he peered into the well, he saw no water. The well was dry. Disheartened and even more thirsty now, he continued along the scorching road, hoping to find another well. Sure enough, before long, he saw one. "At last, water," he whispered, looking into the well, but it was too dry. There was not a drop of moisture in the land. With a parched throat and feeling weak, the man walked on. "I can't go much further without water," he thought. And then he saw a well. Almost afraid to hope, he looked over the edge. Far below, in the darkness, water sparkled. "Allah be praised," the man said. He looked around for a rope and bucket to lower into the well so he could bring up water. There was no rope, no bucket. How could he reach the water he needed so badly? Only one way remained. If the water could not come up to him, he would have to go down to it. He scrambled over to the top and, carefully bracing himself against the sides with his arms and feet, he descended into the well. Deeper and deeper he went until at last he touched the cool, wet water, cupping his hands. He scooped the water and drank and drank. He murmured, "Praise Allah for the liquid of life." Feeling much better, the man began a long, difficult climb up the well. At last he reached the top and stood again on the road under the hot sun. He was starting to walk away when he heard a sound, a soft, sad whine. He looked around and saw a dog sniffing at the ground. The dog looked miserable. His eyes were glazed, and he was panting with thirst. He came up to the man and licked the edge of his robe, which was wet from the trip down the well. This poor animal was thirsty as I was, the man thought. He'll die in this heat if he doesn't get water. The dog looked up at the man and wagged his tail, grateful for the bit of moisture. The man made his decision. "Wait here," he said. "I will bring you some water." Into the well he went. Again, he descended down, 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 all the way to the bottom where the cool liquid lay. When he got there, the man braced himself against the walls and took off his leather boots. He dipped one boot and then the other into the water and filled them. He clamped the tops of the boots between his teeth and began to climb up again. This time, the trip took a lot longer. The heavy water-filled boots dragged him down. His mouth and teeth hurt. Once the slick, wet leather slipped and he almost dropped the boots, but he tightened his grip and held on. Slowly, he kept climbing up until he reached the top. When he was on the ground again, he knelt down and opened the boots so the dog could drink. The dog drank all the water in both boots, his tail wagging happily. The man smiled. "Now neither of us will die of thirst," he said. He pulled on his damp boots. Patted the dog again, and continued on his way. Ella was pleased by this kind act. He was so pleased that all the man's past sins were forgiven, and years later, when the kind man died, his soul was taken to heaven.
Thank you, Emmett. Hang on really quick. So, no, Emmett, you missed one part. The blessed prophet Muhammad concluded his story by saying, "You too will be rewarded for being good to all living creatures." So hang on, buddy, before you go anywhere. Come here. What do you think that story means? Or do you want to throw the question out to any of your friends out there?
I'm not really sure what it means.
What did he do for the dog?
He gave the dog what he needed to live.
Did he think that dogs are less than people? No, I don't think he thought that either. What do you think, Sonia? Or Naomi's there too. Hi, Naomi.
I
Hi,
think the moral of the story would be that that when you do good deeds will come to you.
Oh, all right. I like that.
Would you repeat that so make sure everybody?
Yes. In case you didn't hear it, Sonia said, when you do good deeds will come to you. It's like karma, right? Yeah. All right. So thank you, Emmett, for reading. You were awesome. Okay. So our meditation this morning, I'm sorry, I got to get to my other thing. One moment, if you'll have a little patience with me. And Sonia and Naomi, it was great to see both of you. I understand if you leave us. Okay.
We could sing them out.
Oh, we could. You want to sing them out? Victor, you can come sing them out while I find this if you like. It's so great to see the kids. Come on, Betty.
Go now in peace. Go now in peace. May the light of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
Thank you. Okay, sorry, this thing is just taking its time a little bit. Oh, I'm on the. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I opened the wrong document here. Okay. All right. Okay, so our meditative reading this morning, well, actually to kind of give context, our service today is all about generosity through hospitality, caring for others. And so here is our meditative reading. It's from Kent Nurburn. Giving is a miracle that can transform the heaviest of hearts. But true giving is not an economic exchange. It is a generative act. It does not subtract from what we have. It multiplies the effect we can have in the world. Thank you, Ian, for putting on the music. So this morning we have a reading called Radical Hospitality. It's by Reverend Dr. Marilyn Sewell. And I know we've heard parts of this before. So I mean, I'm very, very happy that Grace Cannon is going to do our reading today. And she also has some thoughts about it, some of her own wisdom to add. And I couldn't be more thrilled. Grace kind of came into our congregation when in the middle of COVID, we needed help, and she and Ian rose to the challenge, and they were here in the building putting on, YouTube live streams, YouTube live streams. And she always participates so thoughtfully in our discussions. And I've known Grace since she was, I think we were in junior high or something like that. And she's just had like a gentle spirit and a welcoming and accepting and like loving aura forever. And if you know people in junior high, you know that that's not typical. So I am beyond thrilled and grateful that she deigned to share her wisdom with us and her thoughts. And with that, please welcome our very own, yeah, we're calling you that now, you're our very own, Grace Cannon.
Thank you, Jules. Oh my gosh, that is tough to beat. Hold on, I'm gonna ask my neighbors to turn the volume down if they would. Yeah, that's Ian. I'm in the other room in an attempt to be able to share this talk with you all a little more easily. So thank you all so much. I want to say very at the top, thank you to Jules for inviting me to read this message today. She thinks that I'm doing her a favor maybe, but I actually am really grateful for the way that it has made me feel included and valuable. And so I just wanted to say that before I said anything else. So as Jules said, the talk she invited me to read is called Radical Hospitality, written by Reverend Dr. Marilyn Sewell. The Reverend Sewell is a minister emerita of the First Unitarian Church in Portland, Oregon, where she served for 17 years before her retirement in 2009. She's had a very distinguished career. She even had a documentary film made about her called Raw Faith, I discovered. Before I jump into the talk, I just wanted to establish some context. It's important in situations where we're observing the world and drawing conclusions about the broader human experience to locate ourselves in the social structures of our culture. So what I mean by that is just to say that to identify myself as a straight cisgender white woman, and I'll be reading the words of another straight cisgender white woman today. These various identities carry with them a good deal of advantage, which colors the lens through which I perceive the world and my inevitable implicit biases. They say nothing, however, of my capacity for empathy, self-reflection, and critical thinking. Only I can work to demonstrate those things through my actions. And that's why I appreciate the UU Fellowship. We have the opportunity here every week to practice all three of those things together. So then the next little part of my context setting is that I want to give I want to say that I've been reading a book lately by Bell Hooks called All About Love. And if you don't know who Bell Hooks is, she's a writer, educator, cultural critic, feminist theorist. She's a Black woman. She's a native Kentuckian. I highly recommend you look her up and read anything you can by her. She's written lots of articles and books. So she's written this book called All About Love. And in the beginning, she lays out her thesis for the book, which is that we could all do better to learn how to love. So she writes, she says, awesomely, our nation, like no other in the world, is a culture driven by the quest to love, even as it offers so little opportunity for us to understand love's meaning or to know how to realize love in word and deed. Everyone assumes that we will know how to love instinctively. despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. We still accept that the family is the primary school for love. Those of us who do not learn how to love among family are expected to experience love in romantic relationships. However, this love often eludes us. As we spend a lifetime undoing the damage caused by cruelty, neglect, and all manner of lovelessness experienced in our families of origin and in relationships where we simply did not know what to do. So with this diagnosis, what does Bell Hooks suggest we do in response? Well, she says, imagine how much easier it would be for us to learn how to love if we began with a shared definition. The word love is most often defined as a noun, yet the more astute theorists of love acknowledge that we would all do better if we used it as a verb. She elaborates a sort of long list of what makes up genuine love. She says genuine love is a combination of care, commitment, trust, knowledge, responsibility, and respect. I'm going to list those one more time. It's a long list. I have a hard time holding all of them in my head at once. So genuine love is a combination of care, commitment, trust, knowledge, responsibility, and respect. So I wanted to put out this definition of love as an offering today because I understand generosity as rooted fundamentally in our ability to love. And that is no simple matter, especially in our cultural context. So in another book called Belonging, A Culture of Place, Hooks succinctly points out throughout our nation, the dehumanization of poor people, the destruction of nature for capitalist development, the disenfranchisement of people of color, especially African Americans, the resurgence of white supremacy have all become an accepted way of life. So this is pretty heavy, but the last thing I will say before I go into Sewell's talk is that love does not have to be elusive or mysterious. Hooks says the transformative power of love is not fully embraced in our society because we often wrongly believe that torment and anguish are our natural condition. The ability, end quote. So the ability to love may be a skill that must be taught and cultivated, but that does not mean that lovelessness is our natural state. Hooks says, in a world anguished by rampant destruction, fear prevails. When we love, we no longer allow our hearts to be held captive by fear. As our cultural awareness of the ways we are seduced away from love, away from the knowledge that love heals, gains recognition, our anguish intensifies, but so does our yearning. The space of our lack is also the space of possibility. As we yearn, we make ourselves ready to receive the love that is coming to us as a gift, as promise, as earthly paradise. So that's sort of a preamble, and I will now present to you what the Reverend Dr. Marilyn Sewell has to say about radical hospitality. Radical hospitality. Radical means out of the ordinary, revolutionary even. So what would it mean to receive someone, a stranger, with a presence that was not just polite, but to receive them with revolutionary generosity? Activist Rosemary Harding remembers her growing up days in the South. She especially remembers the hospitality of her mother, Ella Lee, and her great-grandmother, Mariah, or Mama Rai. Mama Rai was born in Africa, was enslaved in Virginia, and died in 1930 at the age of 107. Both these women cultivated a deep hospitality, Harding says, as well as a profound mystic spirituality. In the years that Harding was growing up, her house was a regular stop for neighbors and relatives and friends. Her mother and father made the house welcoming, sometimes too welcoming, it seemed, for all kinds of people to come through, not just neighbors and friends, but peddlers, professional gamblers, petty thieves, prostitutes, and people we would probably call homeless today. Her mother would set out beautiful china dishes and slices of her homemade pound cake for all of them, especially the ones just passing through. It was as if she knew that they needed special attention. And besides, she genuinely enjoyed hearing their stories and learning from them. She knew that wisdom came from many sources. An itinerant bookseller would come now and then for a visit. He would sit down with Mom there in the dining room and talk for hours about the events of the day and about books. The man was not always very clean, and sometimes, Harding says, we children could smell the mustiness of his ragged clothes and sweat of his body. His speech was strange too, and we children were tempted to laugh, she says, but if we so much as let out a snicker, Mom would cut her eyes at us and set us straight. Harding goes on to say, the efforts my parents made to be neighborly and to reserve judgment against those who society viewed as outcasts served as important examples for their children and grandchildren as we grew into adulthood. Hospitality was the foundation of my family's spirituality. Hospitality is a word with a spiritual history, as a matter of fact. Monasteries grew up around the 5th century. Strangers in need could come there for care. The first primitive hospitals, in fact, began there. Hospital, hospice, hospitable, hospitality, all from the same root word, meaning generous, caring, sustaining. The most famous of these monasteries was that of Saint Benedict. Benedict created a book of rules to live by called the Rule of Benedict, which is used still today by many monasteries. The foundation of the rule is listening. Listen with the ear of your heart, Benedict writes. And yet the kind of warm-hearted generosity described by Rosemary Harding is more difficult in our day and age, more difficult in the city than in the small town. More of us live in places distant from our relatives, places where neighbors come and go, and there's not that continuity of place that gives us the confidence to allow the stranger in. When I grew up in that little Louisiana town of 5,000, we never locked our door. After all, not a single neighbor ever moved the whole time I lived there. Not only did I know all of our neighbors, I knew all their dogs. I was in and out of the homes of most of these folks, some more than others. It's different now. I'm a single woman in the city. I'm vulnerable. My door stays locked. I don't want to move back to that little town, move away from the stimulation and progressive values of the city, but I have to ask, what have I lost? Robert Putnam, the Harvard political scientist best known for his book, Bowling Alone, in which he writes of the growing isolation of Americans, Robert Putnam has done some new research, and his conclusions have been surprising. He wanted to find out what happens when diverse groups of people live in the same area, as opposed to a homogeneous group of people living in an area. He found that when people are near people unlike themselves, they tend to hunker down. Not only do they not interact as much with people who are different from themselves, but they don't interact with their own group as much. They watch more TV, they have fewer friends, they are less likely to work on community projects. The level of trust and interaction is greatest when people are with others who are most like themselves. When these results came back, Putnam distrusted what he saw, and so did his colleagues. So he spent years more checking out his data. 30,000 people were interviewed. And yes, he found he was right. Putnam, a dyed-in-the-wool progressive and very pro-diversity, nevertheless, concludes, in the face of diversity, most of us retreat. Another study shows that churches that try to bridge social divisions have a tough job. Paul Lichterman, in his book Elusive Togetherness, says that churches that attempt to bridge strong social differences mean well, but are most often not successful. He says when churches in his study tried to do outreach, differences in social customs and in styles of relating made it nearly impossible for faith-based efforts to close the gaps. He said that the single group in his study that did succeed constantly evaluated, He said that the single group in his study that did succeed constantly evaluated and reevaluated what they were doing and why they were doing it in order to understand their own cultural underpinnings and those of others. In other words, they paid close attention to how they were talking, interacting, and engaging on a daily level. They learned to approach others as partners rather than as people they were helping. Success, in other words, lies not so much in ideology or in organizational structure, but in the detailed content of our conversations. So, what does this mean for us as a church? We are committed to being a welcoming community. We say we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all. And yet we are human beings, and we have the same challenges that all human beings have. We feel more comfortable when we're with the people we know. We come to church, we gravitate to people we know. We feel less comfortable when we are with people who have different ideas and interests, different cultural assumptions. Tribalism is strong, and we need look no further than our church. Let's talk about some people who might actually visit our church and imagine to what extent they might feel welcomed. And the examples I'm giving are not unlike people who have actually visited our church. A young woman with an infant in her arms. When the baby starts to whimper during the service, she begins breastfeeding. A Native American with long dark hair walks in. A man from a Pentecostal background waves his hands in the air during the singing of Spirit of Life. A beautiful 6'4" transgender woman in a flowered print dress with matching high heels and purse. A person who speaks out of turn and can't follow the hymns. He seems to be mentally ill. A well-dressed couple. The man has an American flag in the lapel of his suit, and they have their Bibles with them. A homeless man who hasn't bathed in a week. A woman with a guide dog. A serviceman back from Iraq in uniform visiting with his aunt and uncle. A 21-year-old who just graduated from college back east and moved here to find his first job. He knows no one in town. He is African American. Let me ask you, have you ever been in a situation in which you felt utterly alone? In a new town or a city where you knew no one? I've experienced this more than once, and it doesn't feel good. One time was during the late 1960s when I taught summer school in one of LBJ's programs for disadvantaged children in New Orleans. It turns out that I was the only white person in the school, students or teachers. I remember that nobody wanted to park their car next to mine in the staff parking lot. I learned about a lot about how it feels to be different that summer and alone. There are those who come to this city every year and many who come to this church who are coming to start a new life. They move here because of some kind of major transition, a new job, a loss of a spouse, or simply the desire to start over in a great city. But even in gorgeous, livable Portland, starting over isn't easy. We miss the friends we left behind, our old familiar restaurants, our hairdresser. It takes a long time to rebuild a community of comfort and belonging. But there's the church, our church. We hope might be a place where a wayfaring stranger can find respite, acceptance, a new beginning. People don't dress up and come downtown to church on Sunday morning on a whim. People are here because they need to be here. I hope we would be called a friendly church, a hospitable church. And I think we are. But do we practice radical hospitality? And if we did, what would that look like? Churches typically offer personal support to their members, but often stop there. A congregation committed to radical hospitality would go beyond seeking out others like themselves for mutual support. Such a congregation would recognize the humanity of anyone who walks into that church. And such a congregation would concern themselves with people who feel beyond the reach of organized religion. The public theology of such a church would not be limited to charity, which after all puts the receiver one down, but would be committed to justice. Surely this is part of our mission at this church, and our new Buchan building will allow us to be more open and receptive than ever before to many different people and different groups who come here and share this building with us. Right now in this country and here in Portland, a strong church sanctuary movement is growing in response to new pressures on illegal immigrants. I haven't been around this summer while the movement was building, but I want to challenge the church to evaluate in what way we might want to be a part of this movement, which is surely a huge issue of hospitality for this whole country at the moment. We call them guest workers, don't we? So radical hospitality is a term that rolls easily off the tongue. To actually carry it out is a demanding undertaking. But we are not a department store, not a government agency, not an HMO. In all these places, one would expect to be received politely, as it were, served, as is our due. No, we are a church, and it is appropriate that we ask ourselves, what is the moral dimension of our hospitality? The moral dimension of our reception of others, of our solidarity with others who may not look like us or move from the same assumptions or values? I'm not talking about being politically correct or legalistic. I am talking about hospitality as spiritual practice. I am not talking about just opening the doors. I am talking about opening the heart. Yes, bringing diverse people together is difficult. I think we have established that. This is not because people are bad, it's because human beings have a built-in tribalism that needs to be challenged consciously, intentionally. What then opens the heart and brings people who are different together? It is not ideology or theology, nor is it form that brings people together. It's content and it's conversation. It's the universals that all people care about, their children, this good earth, an end to mindless violence, a yearning for peace. Let me give you some examples. A couple of years ago, a professor at Multnomah Bible College invited me to speak at a conference. Many of you know how I struggled with that speech, how I woke up in the night writing speech after angry speech, and how I finally came down to what we had in common, Jesus. My talk was entitled, "Will the Real Jesus Please Stand Up?" I said some things that may have been hard for them to hear, especially how hurtful their stance on homosexuality has been to my people. But as one who was raised a Southern Baptist and who does love Jesus, I stood on their ground as one of them. And then when our General Assembly came to Portland this past June, I invited the same professor, Dr. Paul Metzger, to speak about environmental issues at an outdoor rally. He came and he was enthusiastically received. He is one of the evangelical leaders who is speaking out on climate change. He wants his children and grandchildren to have a viable life on this earth, and so do I. And as a Christian, he cares about what the failure of the ecosystem will do to the poorest of the poor, and so do I care. There's a lot that draws us together. I speak of radical hospitality today because there is a world out there that needs home, that needs community, and I want us to stretch spiritually, to stretch ourselves open. I know that when we take the risk, yes, of course we'll blunder, we'll make mistakes. Believe me, I have blundered more than once. But when we take that risk, our lives will grow so much richer and deeper because we have extended ourselves. Our creativity will blossom, for we will not be stuck with our old assumptions, our narrow ways of perceiving reality. Our world will grow wider and softer and more trusting. In closing, let me share a note that I received just this last week. This note was from a grandmother who had mentioned to me in passing a concern about her granddaughter. The little girl was to start her first day of school this last Friday, and she was the only white child in her class. How would her granddaughter respond? Would she feel other? Would she feel left out? Then I got this note on Saturday, which I will read in part. It says, I wanted you to know that my granddaughter loved her first day at school. Being the only white child never affected her. She made a new friend, loved the free chocolate milk, and gave up her homemade lunch to join the others for a free lunch. I've concluded that it is often our fears as adults that can muddy the waters for these young people who already know how to love. Now we have to pause and ask some questions here. Would it be the same if her grandchild were the only child of color in the class? And will it be the same when her granddaughter begins to see class differences and begins to understand that all that free lunch implies? These are open questions. Nevertheless, the essential rightness of this final statement of the note remains. It's the adults who muddy the water. Young people already know how to love. I have seen attitudes shift hugely in my lifetime, and that shift comes from the young people. It comes from our children. We who are perhaps less malleable need to notice and to learn. So be it. Amen. That's the end of the talk. I think maybe there's some music next.
There is. We were just enjoying it from the other vantage point. Grace, thank you so much. That was delightful. Yeah, our hymn is, and believe it or not, this hymn I had already picked before I knew it was going to be Grace. So hopefully you'll, oh, what is going on? Desktop one, share. Oh, it's not letting me, sorry, just a second.
Amazing Grace, isn't it?
Yes, sir. It's,
You happen to know the number?
click the lock to make changes. Okay, there we go. Sorry. What'd you say, Victor?
Do
Sorry.
you happen to know the number?
I don't know the number. I'm sorry. Oh, it's telling me I need to quit Zoom in order to. What? Okay. I'll be back in a hot second.
What was the hymn? I can try to grab it.
It was Amazing Grace. That's what Jules was leading up to.
I don't know if I can find it real quick. Which version was it?
Yeah, there's only like 5,000 versions.
Right. There's an Aretha Franklin version. Okay. That's pretty intense.
Play.
Oh, no, we're good.
All right. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I had to get a new computer and then everything just changes and I have to redo all the things I've done forever. So right now, I'd like to welcome everybody to open your hearts of generosity, like Ramona was talking about earlier. There are multiple ways to donate to our mission in this church, and one is to send your check payable to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Sheridan to Ramona Stein. Her address is in the email sent by Victor, but that is, we can put it into the chat as well. Also, at our website, SheridanUU.org, there is a Tithely link. So if you would join me, let this be an offering to sustain and strengthen this place, which is so sacred to many of us, a community of memory and hope, for we are the keepers of the dream. All right. So before I open us up to discussion, I have these closing words for us from Letty M. Russell. Hospitality is the practice of God's welcome by reaching across difference to participate in God's actions, bringing justice and healing to our world in crisis. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Grace, and I welcome everybody to join in the discussion.
Thanks, Jules. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this. If anybody has reactions off the top of their head.
So I'll jump in first, just because I like to. So I think Amazing Grace really fits because you were amazing this morning. And I really liked how you had your intro with a discussion about how love is an action, a verb rather than a noun, because I think that really does fit with the radical generosity, hospitality. Here's my question. Do you think that if we as UUs engaged in hospitality with people who think very differently from us, we could be doing something to heal the great rift that is before us?
Big question. Thank you, Victor. You know, what I would be concerned with is focusing on people who are marginalized more than I would be, whatever that might mean, more than I would be concerned. I feel like sometimes, especially living in a pretty predominantly conservative place, there's like a pressure to understand the conservative mindset to bridge that gap. And I like to spend more time thinking about who maybe needs more. I don't know. Maybe I'm othering people who have a conservative mindset, but I worry about spending too much time trying to reach across the aisle towards the sort of like status quo that's really in power versus being compassionate and thinking about being a space, opening up a space that's truly inclusive and welcoming for folks who maybe don't even feel like there's a place for them in even a small community like ours. I don't know if that answers your question, Victor. That's just what came to mind.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A thought that I had about this is that we have friends that we've known for 30 or 40 years who are of a conservative mindset, and the pandemic has led us to not really be able to be in touch with them because of their refusal to wear masks and do those kinds of things. In fact, to even have the COVID and not report it and not see it as something that is of a concern to them. And we are so strict on that it's really shut things down for us. So in a way, even though financially in those ways they are not others, they have become others to us because there are those others who do those same things. And it makes it very difficult to maintain the relationship that we've had for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another chunk of the possibilities of how this, love is agape in my mind. And so I like to believe that even if Trump were to be in danger and I could stop a bullet for him, I'd do it. But I question my ability to do it readily.
Yeah, I would say I appreciate that, Bruce. I think we're in a really difficult time. This last year, the pandemic has manifested our political differences quite tangibly and made it really difficult for us to even share space with people who think differently. And that's really challenging. And it's really important to try not to other anybody, but I think we've got to just give as much care as we can to anybody we can. That's what I keep thinking about. That's that hospitality thing, I think. Matt.
Hey, everybody. In your, I think your opening, you were referencing bell hooks. And I remember, I think I read a bell hooks piece back in the day where she was talking about being caught between her family at home and her new friends and coworkers. Did she go to Stanford?
She might have. I can't remember.
I think it was her that wrote it. And the idea that she didn't really fit in with her family when she went back home from college, but she didn't really fit in with her new friends and coworkers and, you know, faculty and staff and such at Stanford either. And so like I'm thinking about what Bruce just said, and I'm thinking about what you've said and what others have said, and kind of trying to apply it a little bit. And I think that what you were saying at the beginning about bell hooks with like how we still kind of think of love as being something that's taught by your family, or if you don't get it from your family, you are supposed to find it in romantic love. And I think that in times like this where it's hard to sit down with your family because of the pandemic, and it's hard to be with people that are different from you, I guess what I would say to Bruce and anybody else that's you know, trying to show radical hospitality, latch on to little things, because like it might be talking to somebody via chat on Facebook or in a Zoom meeting, and that might be the only chance you get to feel love or to give love or to help somebody join the group. And that was really rambling, but yeah.
Thanks, Matt. I think that was very coherent and cogent. Susie, mom.
Susie mom wants to say something. I thought it was interesting and meaningful that you began this by kind of placing yourself in relation to others as a white cisgendered woman, and you know that notion. And it occurred to me as you went on how important it is for us to look inside, to take stock of who we are. If we are going to be able to be successful at hospitality, and that's not a thought I'd had before. Hospitality always felt like looking out, but I think what you did showed me that first you look in and take stock of where you fit in relationship. That's kind of vague too, but that was a new thought, and I love new thoughts. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That kind of reminds me of the story that Emmett read. Because he didn't have to look out for that dog. He had to look within to see if he was willing to do the right thing. So.
Yeah, I've been just really taken by Bell Hooks's reflections on how do we learn how to love? You know, I mean, you know, and that to me was like really interesting with the end of Dr. Sewell's piece, where it's like this notion that young people know how to love. And I don't know. I think that would be something interesting to discuss, just because I think it's a nice idea that we like to go, oh, the young people have it figured out. They're going to save and fix this broken world. And I was, a year ago, I was going to different college campuses, leading retreats, having conversations about the state of politics. Like, this is before, the whole world shut down because of COVID. But they were talking about, just how divisive, how toxic it all was, and how sick they were of hearing the adults say, the young people are going to fix it. And that really stuck out to me. Maybe because I'm also in my 30s, and I was like, oh yeah, I guess I'm not maybe in that category anymore with these college students. That's hard to hear over and over and over again, I think. And how do they know how to love? How do we learn that? We have to be really conscious, I think, and intentional about how we love ourselves, how we teach our children and our communities to love, how we show that. That's just something I've been thinking of. It's complicated. Everything's always more complicated.
You struck a thought in me. I remember back when I was in college and before my 30s, the saying at that time was, don't trust anybody over 30. And so that was old. At the same time, that has to do with, in a way, people who are different than you or function differently. I remember coming up to UU one time. I was doing some fix-it thing, and there were some people waiting at the door. And it was when we were when Verlene was beginning a group for homosexual people, and there were two people waiting. He says, "Is this where the meeting is?" I said, "Well, I think so." And one was dressed pretty differently than I was used to, and I hadn't opened the door yet, and I hesitated. Should I open this door? Should I really? Do I know these people are part of that group or whatever? I went ahead and opened it. I hope they didn't notice my hesitation. But I say, whoa, what are you about here, guy? I mean, this is the one of the few places in this community that people could come and feel safe. And so I didn't like myself for the hesitation, but I hope it wasn't too visible, and we got the information taken care of and so on. So it's with you every minute, and you have to pay attention.
That's what Grace was saying in her thing, Bruce, or well, what Grace read that Dr. Sewell said is, the group in that study that improved is the one who was conscious of their bias and who kept asking, how do I improve and how do I change? So I think you might not love yourself in that moment that you hesitate, but the fact that you reflect upon it and think, how would I do that differently in the future? That is where human growth and to some degree hospitality to self starts, right? Is being able to allow yourself to grow from that situation.
I think that one can be more hospitable if one is accountable.
Yes.
To oneself and others.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. The one last thing I'll say too, and I know we're kind of getting late here in the service, but I was really taken by a lot of what was in Sewell's talk, but I also wanted her to name white supremacy and patriarchy and some of these invisible forces in our culture, that it's not just tribalism, I would dare to say it's also that it means something different to be the only white person in a room than it does to be the only Black person, right? There's different power dynamics. And I don't know that she's like not saying that. I just wanted it named a little bit in terms of what that is. And also, and I sensed a little bit too in her talk that there was like an audience she was speaking to, And I wondered if it was like a predominantly white audience. And I just think we need to, you know, be conscious of when we're speaking, the assumptions we're making about who we're talking to and all that. And obviously her talk was written very specifically for her congregation, but I don't know. That's just my last little thing where I was like, oh, you know, there's an important piece here, which is these forces, that it's not just tribalism, it's also the things I already said. White supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, all that stuff. Anyway, that's it.
Okay. One more quick comment.
Yeah.
Just I'm kind of mad at you because I was all settled into into impersonating a plumber and fixing my water heater today and all kind of like focused on that. So now I'm all fired up, of course, and I appreciate that. You know, and a lot to say about that. We need, I'm just thinking about tools. You know, I think we sort of know in theory what some of the tools are, but it's like if we were training for the Olympics or for our version of that, you got to work out. And what's our workout? And how do we start that? And how do we make that realistic? And, you know, and some of it's just, again, you know, getting some more mirrors and using those and helping each other use them and having humor and just really detecting opportunities to connect and detecting when we unconsciously walk by those opportunities, which is real easy to do. A lot of that's sort of like Bruce catching himself with his attitudes, and that's the point where we have to start. And it's good that that's happening, but now what? And now what? So I really appreciate it. Hopefully I can get focused enough to fix my water heater. But thanks a lot. It was a great presentation, and I'm in.
Thanks, Cal.
Yep.
Okay, so you guys, in the interest of letting you all get to your Sunday, we'll give our thanks to Grace, and we'll extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Thanks, Grace.